I would like to check whether my colleague Matteo Goye is already online. I will just introduce him shortly because it's the... Manuel, can you hear us?
Yes, very well.
Yes, thank you very much. So let me just introduce my colleague Manuel Matteo Goye, who is Deputy Head of Unit of the Unit Cloud and Software in DG CNECT. The unit is in charge of the SIMPL procurement and the SIMPL implementation afterwards. He will introduce us to all the kind of the topic, and then he's open for, we have quite a long time, some time for a question, like a Q&A session, so we will profit from that. Manuel is a senior commission official, and he is experienced also from cabinet of Commissioner Gabriel, where he was advising her on copyright, audiovisual, disinformation, high performance computing, digital skills, and e-health. So it's a very experienced EU official, and he was also assistant to Director General. So it's a person who knows everything. So Manuel, thank you very much for agreeing to join us today. You maybe don't see it, but the room is full. It's a popular session, so we are happy to have you here, and over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Muy buenos días, Madrid. Thank you for explaining to everyone why the body hair is not all black anymore. So indeed, I'm Manuel Matteo Goye. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit of the Cloud and Software Unit here in Brussels. And as part of the many things that my unit does, and I'll touch on some of them along this morning's presentation, I take care of SIMPL, which is the core of today's presentation. Let me start by trying to present to share the screen, which we did not rehearse before, but there's no reason this shouldn't work. So this should now land on your main screen,
yes,
hopefully.
You can see it well.
Fantastic. So I'll get into the boring technical details in a moment. But what is important to understand first, I think, is the bigger policy picture. 4 years ago, it was nothing new, but it was a new impetus from the current college and Commissioner Breton and President von der Leyen decided to put, and having been in the House for a while, I can say that it was a real big push into what is generally called the data economy. And that plan was divided in 4 pillars, because public policy are usually 3 or 4 pillars. If it's 2 or 5, it's that someone did something wrong. So this one was 1 of 4. And as you can see, the data spaces are here on the right of the screen, but it's important to look at the 3 others as well. I won't touch too much today on competences and skills, but I can say a few words if I get questions. The investment in capabilities and infrastructures is somehow linked to today as well, because the Commission is investing a lot of funds in this. But it's fair to say as well that the investments go much beyond this morning's discussion. And then a governance framework for data access and use, which is more of a legal, the legal pillar of this strategy. I won't say too much on that first pillar, but I think it's because the names have been in the press quite a bit, and because some of them are new, I thought it was important for me to drop a couple of slides because the names almost sound the same. The difference in between the Data Act and the Data Governance Act is not always striking looking at the name. Of course, the Digital Markets Act is something that has been a complicated negotiation, and and is regularly in the news, no later than 2 weeks ago when the first series of gatekeepers were named. So, and then you see several more of them. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Open Data Directive. And then I don't think there's any citizen today who's not aware of what the GDPR is and stands for. If this was an acronym battle, I'm sure the GDPR would win hands off the European fight for the best, for the most known acronym today. So again, I'm not going to detail those, but I'm leaving behind a couple of slides that will help you put in context all those legal instruments and explaining how they together contribute to a data economy. The focus of today's data spaces, and rather than reading quickly my notes, I prefer to copy and paste them here on the screen so that we can together, and you can keep a trace of this without taking too much notes. A data space is the short name for a federated data ecosystem. So it's federated in the sense that it's different people coming together, not necessarily people who know each other. So we're not talking about bilateral exchanges of data, which have happened since many years. And in that sense, it's an ecosystem. And I think the important, a very important element, which again I will not too much detail today because it's not the focus, is this idea of shared policies and rules. In other words, it's the same. It's an agreed governance in between the different actors of this data space, which can be data holders, so the ones who have the data to begin with, or it can be data users, the ones who use the data in the end. Of course, you can have both hats. But then as well, the Data Governance Act introduces the notion of data intermediary, which is, so by now, because it's law, it's a quite well-defined concept with clear boundaries of what it is and what it is not. And this idea of data intermediary, in short, is someone who's not a user, who's not a provider, but is someone in between. Maybe in plain English, you could call it a data broker, even though that's not the name that was retained. I think that the last paragraph there at the bottom is quite relevant for today's discussion, is that it's this idea of integration, where everybody is connected to the space, but the space is not a central repository of, it's not a pool, a data pool where you throw your data and then it's free for everyone to use. Back to the idea of governance, there are rules on how this data can be reused. So, I mean, I'm not going to go through all my slides one by one, but I usually get the first questions on security and trust. Yes, it's about that. I've never, I still have to see someone who tells me, a data space actor telling me, you know, my data doesn't really need to be secure. Of course, when you take a step back, you can arguably see some things that are more or less sensitive, but I think it's clear that everyone has a kind of special relationship with his own data, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the healthcare sector, or any other public utility. You always have a need for security and how this works. I think I mentioned already the idea that the data holders need to decide how their data is accessed, how it is reused, under which conditions, including monetary in some conditions. I think we work a lot with the public sector where idea of monetizing data is not always present, but when you speak to more private sector oriented data spaces, the industrial, the mobility, the energy, the agriculture sectors, those are sectors where it's my data and I want to make money out of it, and it's very fair. And this is an important dimension, which links back to the security I was mentioning ahead. I think the last bit is always something that we insist a lot, the idea of the openness. Again, it's a data space. It's not a data club. It's not a place where it's not an exchange of data in between a very limited amount of people. Think about a logistical data space where potentially any truck is a data subject of data space. So maybe a word on the Commission intervention. Data spaces is not a concept invented by us. It's not something that we define. It's something that exists out there. So there's always the question of what should be the role of the public sector, and in our case, the one of the Commission. I mentioned already all the legal part. That's very obvious. And setting, if you want, the meta rules, the rules of the game. But then in day-to-day, we're funding several data spaces, but not every data space. There are literally hundreds of initiatives in Europe at the moment. And we're actively working. I don't have the exact figure, but it must be in the 25, 30 range of data spaces. And out of them, we're only funding, I don't have the exact figure, but just to set the numbers, it must be about half of them receive some kind of support from the Commission. And they tend to be in strategic areas. They tend to be more in the public interest area and so on. But I'll come back to that. So I think I presented already a bit of those different ties, and this is where I'm now starting to zoom in the core of today's discussion, which are the right tile and the bottom right tile. We very quickly realized that funding and promoting different data spaces was not was a great idea, but that there were a lot of similarities in between data spaces. Exchanging a piece of data, whether it's the truck location of the delivery for the next supermarket, or whether it's the DNA, the result of a DNA verification in a research institute before you go and get a chemotherapy, is still a pack of bytes being transferred. Don't make the wrong conclusions from what I say. I did not say it's the same type of trust and security and confidentiality, etc. But from a purely technical point of view, it's still bytes passing by communication networks. And so this idea of having a joint technical data infrastructure whereby the similar features, such as sending a packet of information, are dealt the same way, is this idea of having a common technical data infrastructure across the data spaces, because it brings two things. First, as spenders of public money, it allows us to be more efficient. By being more efficient, we hope as well to be faster. And I'll come back to the particular case of EOSC a bit later on. But then it allows as well this right tile of interoperability and interconnection. I'll come back to it in a moment, but when you list all the data spaces, you realize very quickly when you confront this list of data spaces with the real world, you realize that it's civil servants putting things in little boxes, but that the real world is different. Take my usual example is that of a automated autonomous car, which during the day is a data subject of a mobility data space or a smart community data space, depends how you call it, but during the night is an energy is a data subject of an energy data space where you during the day you decide where and how fast the car should drive, and during the night the energy data space decides how much and how quickly the car should be charged, or why not uncharged if the grid requires so. And so this idea of interconnection and interoperability is allowed by the fact that you have a common technical data infrastructure. Of course, you can have different technical infrastructures and still be interoperable, but it works at twice the effort, 4 times the pain, and 10 times the time. So the idea is again to be more efficient. And this is where SIMPL kicks in. So it's this idea of, on the one hand, supporting the sectoral data spaces, that's the green circle, and the bluish circle is this idea of providing a common technical infrastructure. This is a limited list of data spaces. Again, limited because you heard me saying that there are many more. Those are, I think we support financially all of them. And if we're not, maybe the retail we're not, and the construction is more an ID than something else. But don't take my word for the truth here. But you have those ecosystems, which is the way I defined data spaces earlier on in the above picture. And you have the infrastructure part at the bottom. Let me first park the 2 other elements of the screen, which are those things you need to bend your face on the left, which is what is common to everything anywhere, which are standard, trust, skills, and questions like this. You have the marketplaces, which I will park for the sake of discussion, but it's things that we're funding as well. But then if we really keep the green and the blue boxes, you have on top all the data spaces, fine, and then you have the infrastructure. And I think the box at the bottom shows where SIMPL is and what it tries to achieve. And the geometry of the box is important, because SIMPL here is not about providing connectivity or data center capacity to data spaces. This is for each data space and each actor within the data space to figure out. And to avoid making too many boxes here, there are separate instruments through which Europe supports the deployment of data centers and connectivity, but this is not SIMPL. So this is for the bottom side of SIMPL. For the upper part of that box, you see that it's located in the platform band with a bit on the services band, with the idea that it is a platform and it is a few services, but then there are services within data spaces that are specific to data spaces. Earlier on, I was taking the example of the transmission of data for logistical truck locations or for DNA results. Transmission-wise, it's the same, but you could process them then through specific algorithms that have nothing to do with each other. And those are services. You would do, I don't know, in the health sector, you would do a protein 3-dimensional matching. And in the logistical sector, you would do truck efficiency and automated repair. And those are things that are specific to data spaces and for which SIMPL doesn't intend to provide an answer. And then horizontally, the idea is that it's cloud-based, it's edge, because it's tomorrow's evolution of cloud, and we're working a lot on that. But we want SIMPL as well to be at least a gate, a bridge to the world of HPC, where you know that the ongoing efforts to make HPC more accessible to SMEs and the broader industry, so beyond the mere research dimension. And then we want, in this continuum, to the left-hand side, we want SIMPL to be as Internet of Things compatible and inclusive. But bearing in mind that, of course, SIMPL will require its own data calculation and capacities, which are not always deployable on the very small chips and memories that IoT supposes. Maybe a word of EOSC, and it's convenient to be far away and not see your faces. So I don't see if the faces are of terror or disagreement or agreement. But EOSC, so among all those data spaces, some of them exist since a long time. Some others are completely new. For example, the one on Green Deal is something that at the moment doesn't exist, or the one on justice is something. It's a couple of reports and a few ideas in the minds of several. But the cultural heritage in the form of Europeana, that's the brand, exists since 15 years or so. And EOSC, I don't remember the birth date, but is as well something up and running since a while. So I'll get to those details later on, but it's clear that it's not the same to provide tools such as SIMPL for something that exists against something which is completely new. Is EOSC a data space? I would probably argue that it's several data spaces at once. Is it a data space? I would argue that yes. I know that sometimes with my colleagues we argue about what it is to be a data space or not. I think provided if we agree on the earlier definitions, is EOSC an ecosystem? Yes, it's even several. Is it among people who share the same governance and rules? Yes. Is it about sharing data in a trusted manner? Yes. So I think with the caveat that the definition is quite broad, I think EOSC is a data space, but it doesn't mean, as you will see, that it needs to adopt SIMPL the same way as others. So what is the SIMPL? Then let me get within a data space. I already mentioned the idea that a data space is an area where different participants, different actors come together, where typically you have a data provider and an end user of the data, where all this data needs to operate on over infrastructure. So you have this idea of people of actors who provide infrastructure, and then there is this concept of application provider, which is the idea that you might want your data to be processed before it is used in the end, and so it's an extra actor there. And you see here this idea that the SIMPL agent, as I was mentioning earlier, is not something centralized. It's not like a platform to which you connect. It's more tools that you use for yourself, but because you use the same tools in the same manner as the people in your data space, it makes this data space a true federation and a reality. Does it mean that SIMPL is fully distributed? Not really. This is where those grayer boxes appear. For example, identity management is not something that needs to be decentralized. It's something that can be, to the contrary, centralized. as well as the different catalogs. It's not necessarily fair that every single provider in a data space has an up-to-date catalog of everything available in the data space. Think about small SMEs who contribute, who participate very humbly into a very large data space. Do you really need them to be able to manage the data catalog? So those are a few ideas. It doesn't need to be the same answer for every data space, but the idea is as decentralized as possible, because I think this is the evolution of those federations, but as centralized as necessary, and things don't need to be locked in time. Let me maybe have a word as well on how different data spaces can work together, and how the SIMPL deployment doesn't need to be always the same. Take the left-hand side example of smart cities, where maybe the connection goes through national or regional authorities. If instead of smart cities you take the health sector, when I break my leg in Madrid, but I've got some Madrid-based X-rays, but I want my Brussels-based doctor to access them, it should be able to happen, which is not yet the case, but such information typically translates through, travels through central national authorities rather than from the Madrid hospital to the Belgium doctor. So this is kind of where SIMPL is rather the national gate, not gatekeeper, but the national connection to each other. In an industrial data space is the logistic example, where every logistical company is an actor in full rights. And then, so here the example is a destination, but we could have picked EOSC, is in the situations where you have already an existing data space up and running. It's not the working idea is not to replace the existing infrastructure with SIMPL, because arguably it would be a difficult sell, but to begin with, to be again a bridge with other data spaces, and possibly provide new functionalities. I'll come back to it, and maybe over time replacing existing functionalities because the data space judges that it's relevant. So then if I zoom into this blue box of the SIMPL agent, I'll skip you the architecture principle, which are highly relevant, but it will come back in my discussion. If you look into the blue box, if you open the door to the engine room, what it is that we plan on having, it's of course data services. I would say that this is the core of it. This is what I was giving you as examples of sending data, storing data, processing data, etc. But not necessarily all the data services. So it's some data services, but as much as they are common to several data spaces. I mentioned earlier as well, when I showed you the SIMPL against the data centers and connectivity, that the yellow part is very necessary. It's what allows you to abstract the data center and the connectivity you have below you, so that regardless of whether you're an SME on a public cloud, or you're a public sector on your private cloud, or and regardless of the underlying infrastructure technology, you're able to operate SIMPL. So this is the purpose of the yellow box. And then, because as every IT system, you still need this reddish box of administration services. So it's this idea that I was mentioning earlier of billing, but it's all the access controls, is how you manage security, the audit, the reporting, and so on and so on. And this is as technical as I intend to get, at least to begin with, but so that you know each of those three colors boxes are then further detailed into what I would call building blocks, or I mean the word of building block is very is used in many different contexts, but I'm sure we understand each other that it's different components of the whole simple approach. So I'm quickly going through without explaining each of them. I don't know if there's people taking pictures in the room, but I've already provided the slides to the organizers, who will certainly be happy to share them with you. Do know that what I'm presenting here in boxes and very visually exists in proper paper deliverables if you want to go further into the understanding and the details. So I'm slowly getting to the end of it and tell you where we are with this. We've done. We want SIMPL altogether to be open source. Why open source? Plenty of good reasons, such as enhancing trust. We don't see a tool whose code is not fully open to be adopted by many sectors on questions on trust. Think about the European COVID app, which was fully open source, and I don't think it would have developed and be taken up so much without it being open source, but there are countless amount of examples. Open source is a long-standing policies of most member states and definitely Europe, where it's the default choice, and as well because I mean obviously we're going to spend a significant amount of money in developing SIMPL, but more importantly, we want this to be picked up by the community at large, and we don't pretend to be the only ones to have an interest in having a shared data infrastructure. And so the idea is that others can contribute, and the easiest way to do this is certainly through open source. So in the procurement, which I will cover in a second, we first did a market study of existing initiatives that are open source. We looked at which aspects of those three layers are already exist out there. As the slides suggest, not all of them are, none of them are comprehensive, and none of them are an initiative. We could simply say, well, we build an extra component on top of EGI or an OpenStack or Xroad, and the job is done. But we found a lot of interesting elements among those different initiatives, and so the idea is really to reuse where it makes sense a lot of things that exist out there. Preaching for my own church, you have on the bottom left side here the building blocks that the European Commission has already developed for European needs. But you see there many different initiatives that exist. So what are we procuring at the moment? We're procuring three things. First, SIMPL Open, which is what I've been describing so far, which is really the core of SIMPL. It's all these technical foundations, and it's all this open source. And we're going to, part of the budget will be dedicated to animate and bring on board a community. But then we're procuring as well for SIMPL Labs, which will serve two functions. It's first to be a place where you can come and test a data space, a vanilla, if you want, an out-of-the-box example of a data space. Say if you're a newcomer into a data space and you just want to see if it works and how it works, etc., or if you want to test the latest feature of SIMPL Open. But as well, if you have an existing data space, and this might be interesting for many of you, if you have an existing data space, to understand how much your, my colleagues call it conformity assessment, but in plain English, I like to use the word of how much you are compatible with simple infrastructures and how much you are already interoperable and what's the gap to be fully interoperable. And then for a limited number of instances, we will do the own deployment of SIMPL, or rather, we will help the deployment, but not to do it on behalf of SIMPL for some data spaces. And in the tender documents, which are public, we mentioned those three data spaces, but we as well hinted at the fact that Destination Earth and EOSC are close candidates as well. So I think in the carton box we have those ideas as well. I mean, maybe a word on the tender, which so the tendering phase was in between April and May, if I'm correct. We're still finalizing the evaluation. It's based on what I call here the Deloitte study, because it's Deloitte who helped us precise all the ideas and doing the market analysis that I presented a moment ago. I mentioned the open source community building. It's modern development, so it's agile DevSecOps. EOSC, and this is my standard slide, I did not adapt it to today. We were making a big link at EOSC, at GaiaX, and Cloud Native Computing Foundations as things that are worth building over and reusing where possible. I'll skip that slide for the sake of time. Maybe the takeaways for me, and since I will not be there to share a coffee with you, I think the takeaways is, one, if you're an EOSC end user, keep an eye on this, don't be alarmed. It will come in due time, probably through the means of improvements to your platform, whether by making it more interoperable with other data spaces or by seeing new features. If you are an EOSC tech provider, or in whichever form, be in touch with us. This fall might be still a bit early, but we hope that very early in the new year we will have a new, the contractors decided, and be able to engage technically with you to understand how EOSC and SIMPL can work hand in hand much better. So this was my 20, which ended up being more than 30 minutes explanation of what's SIMPL, but I'm glad to see that there's still plenty of time to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for the presentation. Indeed, we have 20 minutes for questions. We are also, for the online community, we can take questions via a Slido. So I can open now the floor for your questions, please. Yes, please. Can we have microphone for?
Vincent Breton, CNRS. Thank you very much first for this very clear talk and explanations. I had a question about the Deloitte study. Is it publicly available?
Yes, it is. It is public. It's 1,000 pages of 8-10 deliverables. But if you're interested in reading the words behind the slides, most of the slides that I presented today, it's your best landing point at this stage.
And I see there's a question online. When will SIMPL products be available for testing and use? I think you already mentioned next year. So testing and use.
So the timeline, I'm unfortunately bound to public procurement rules and cannot say all I know. But the public objective is to have the contractual and admittedly less fun part dealt in 23 and have a contractor up and running in early 24. So we will obviously prioritize SIMPL Open with the SIMPL Labs and Live following very close behind. My goal is to have things starting to be available as of next summer and definitely Christmas 24.
Okay, I think there was one question.
Yeah, it's sort of a technical question. This is Abdurrahman Azza from the Nordic Infrastructure Collaboration. So in the technical slides that you presented about the integration with the infrastructure components, I'm wondering how SIMPL will be flexible. For example, as a cloud platform, you presented OpenStack. There are many other virtualization hypervisor platforms out there in different infrastructure providers, some of them using VMware, some of them are using others. And how flexible it is. I mean, are you planning to adapt to some interface that is more generalized, like Terraform, for example, or you will be very strict to some back-end infrastructures for cloud and others?
So I'll use my usual joker in the sense that we're still procuring, so I can still promise plenty of things, and maybe in a year or two I'll explain you why it didn't happen. But yes, the idea is to be completely infrastructure agnostic, so that it can be deployed over different infrastructures. I mean, I think the default nowadays tends to be, or not the default, but the most used one tends to be over containers or the Kubernetes. But other situations exist, and we want this to be able to be deployed everywhere. Now, whether we will reach 100% of this very specific type of infrastructures, I don't know, but certainly more than Kubernetes. I think the idea is that I mean our will is not to force people to adopt a given infrastructure or not, but rather to adapt to existing infrastructures and be able to be deployed above it. But then, and this is as well where I need to confess my technical limitations, my colleagues are telling me, well, attention to what you say, because sometimes it really gets very specific and complicated. So you know, this is a promise of a non-technician who doesn't understand all the intricacies.
Thank you. I think there was one question here.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Frederick Coppens from VIB and also Elixir. So I'm one of these tech providers. On the technical side, there's a lot of questions. I don't think we can go there. I think we now have this initiative. On the other hand, there's a lot of projects funded by the Commission to do exactly the same components that are listed there. So I think one question is, I see you're doubting. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, we have 80% of this up and running because otherwise we couldn't provide services. And a lot of I'm taking part in projects that are developing things that are what were on the slide. So I'm a bit worried about how this will work. And I think my main worry is that as this will take some time to set up, which I fully appreciate, I think summer is optimistic. If we have things up and running by end of the year, that would be great. Will this mean that in the next year, all innovation will be stopped because people are looking what SIMPL will do because you're pouring 150 million in this?
I knew I would get a question, not necessarily in those terms, but it always comes back. So maybe just to end with to begin with the end, but the main answer will come. 150 is the maximum size of the framework contract. It's the maximum that we can then, in the course of specific contracts, spend. The committed budget or the engaged budget in from the DEP work program at the moment is 65 million. So just to set figures correctly. But then to the core of your question, I think this is where we've had a lot of discussions with internally and with colleagues. And the answer is that we want to cater for the many different situations of many different data spaces. And we realize that there are specific cases such as EOSC, Europeana, Destination Earth, where there's things that are up and running that we cannot disrupt, that we don't want to disrupt, and which would be simply dumb to do so. But let me start, I'll come back to that in a second, but let me start with the other end. What would be completely dumb as well on our end would be to launch new data spaces initiatives which are starting from literally scratch, from the ideas of a few businesses, public sectors. I mean, it depends on a case by case. Take the tourism one, it's just the idea of a couple member states and a couple agencies within them, but there's nothing materialized. And it would be completely dumb on our end to launch new initiatives without giving them a joint technical direction, telling them, being much more directive at what they can and they cannot do and what they should reuse and not. So to take the very, very extreme case of a data space which today doesn't exist, so it doesn't exist, so I can't give you an example, but if someone tomorrow comes and says, we have this great new idea of a data space, we have nothing but just a great idea, we'll tell them, great, here is SIMPL Open. We will finance you to deploy over SIMPL Open, your own instance of SIMPL Open, and voila. I think this is the easiest case. And then it gets gradually more complex as some people don't have anything up and running, but have already a data infrastructure and governance in place where they've already figured out the things. And then you have the case of EOSC and a couple others where it's more complicated. What I see happening and what I hope we can agree, but I understand there's a lot of nuance, is that you have today the EOSC infrastructure and architecture. You will have tomorrow SIMPL. And what I hope, or what I think we will see, is that let me try to put myself in EOSC shoes. You said 80%, good. So maybe the first thing you will notice is those 20% that SIMPL does and the EOSC platform doesn't do. And you think, well, not a bad idea, we could use it. Why not reuse the same building block? Because it's out there, it's available, it's interoperable, it's getting attraction and deployment by others, and voila. And so you're already 20% into SIMPL. And maybe next year or the following year or the next time you want to reiterate on one of your building blocks, because whatever, technology moves on or you need a refresh, or the technology is continued, or it was built on something 10, 12 years ago and is by now partially obsolete, and you need to replace or change a module. And this is a bit a simplified view of reality. Well, that day you will do your own study and look at what is possible, not possible, desirable, etc. And the hope is that at that stage, the simple option is not only on your table, but is as well attractive. I'm speaking for that precise module, is as well attractive and interesting and an obvious choice for you. But this is something where SIMPL still needs to demonstrate his usability and sexiness and interest, etc. So the day has not come, but I hope that end of 24, in the course of 25, 26, we'll see more and more of that. But
so
let's set an appointment.
We only have 8 minutes left. I propose we take one question from the online community. It was, if SIMPL is really needed, why wasn't it invented already by the private sector?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a tech guru. I don't know. I think I think the whole concept of data spaces, again, with the exceptions of Europeana, EOS, Destination Earth, is something. When you look, it's not something that was so widespread. This is a way to say that it did not exist until a few years ago. I remember working on the data economy, or what wasn't called back then the data economy, and those ideas were not there. When the European Commission wrote its digital agenda for Europe in 2010, 2009, there was not a single mention of the word data in the communication, and it's only 13 years ago. Then we refreshed it in 2012, and data was all around. But the word information was there quite a bit, but not data. And I think it's a constant evolution, and this is maybe a bit of a new kid on the block. And maybe a final word on this question of private. I think this is an effort from the public sector to for everyone, because it's the world where the public and the private sector are completely hermetic has disappeared, but our focus and our interest and our immediate concern is the public sector. And I think, so I mentioned figures earlier on, I think it's just seed money, or it's seed money for an area where there will be commercial and business developments that dwarf the initial money that we're putting in here. So it's not. I don't think we're replacing anything from the private sector. I rather think we're seeding a grain that will then be harvested by the private sector.
So I propose we have still 5 minutes. I think Tiziana was already there. So propose a final question from Tiziana, and then if needed, I can also respond after the session. And we have also a session on data spaces later on. Maybe there will be some also answers. So Tiziana, please.
I have a question about the technical roadmap of SIMPL, and the question is the following. Will be a process to drive the technical specifications with user requirements? And if EOSC stakeholders wants to be early adopters, can you say a word on how the process will be organized to feed requirements and facilitate the early adoption process? Thank you.
Tiziana, the answer is yes to pretty much everything. In details, yes, we want this to be community-driven, needs-driven. I think there's some of all the building blocks. If you look into the deliverables of the Deloitte study, they come with some prioritization. We're not going to develop them all at once, and we have a timeline of what is more urgent than others. It's in the documents there. It was not part of the slides, but it exists out there. But this is a timeline made in between, Deloitte and my colleagues. So I'm not sure it's completely robust and stands the actual needs of the communities at large. So we will be listening very closely to the community. The last slide that I did not present, but if you have a presentation on data spaces, make sure to listen when they speak about the Data Space Support Center. It's an action funded by the Commission to precisely be a joint help desk or support center for data spaces, which we hope, it's not that we hope, we know they're aggregating the needs of different data spaces, and to which we will be, they're helping us in gathering and prioritizing those requirements. So we will be listening to them probably more carefully than anyone else, but we will be listening to anyone and to the user needs from the open source community. Absolutely. So yes to all. But again, we haven't started anything, so it's easy to make promises. I'll come back in a year's time if you want, and we will be able to complain if we fail.
Thank you. I think I would propose that we close the session. I'm available for questions, and actually the support center will be involved in the next presentation, so they will be already contributing. Thank you, Manuel, for the great presentation. You don't see it, but the room has much more questions, and online community as well. We will deal with this here. And thank you as well for your participation. And I think this is something which will be developed very actively next year. You will hear from European Commission on numerous occasions with the EOSC events. So thank you, Manuel as well. And
muchas gracias, Madeline. Que lo paséis bien.